A U.S. military official says Iran fired a medium-range missile Wednesday, but that it did not pose a threat to American or Western military bases. The New York Times reported the country fired a Shahab-3 missile off its southern coast. It landed east of Tehran and stayed within Iran for the entire flight. This missile test will likely be discussed at an upcoming meeting between nations that are still members of the Iran nuclear deal. Representatives from the European Union, France, United Kingdom, Germany, Russia, and China will convene in Vienna Sunday. The group will assess what parts of the 2015 agreement can be salvaged, if any. Behnam Taleblu joins me now. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, what message does this missile test send not only to the U.S., but to Europe?
Well, great to be with you. And in fact, those are the right audiences, the Europeans and the Americans, that Iran is trying to signal to. Iran is trying to say to Europe, the closer you move to Washington, the more likely we are to continue this destabilizing behavior you're afraid of and previously have critiqued. And to the Americans, this is part of Iran's full-court press to fight max pressure with max fear. This is Iran's attempt to make the Americans concerned about multiple theaters that exist of conflict between America and Iran: the Gulf, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and now missile testing and likely even the cyber domain. So by ranking up the pressure there, America is going to be faced with a choice to end the max pressure campaign or continue, but risk this continued Iranian escalation as well.
This particular type of missile is not a new one for Iran. U.S. military officials seem to downplay the concern, but should the White House be concerned?
Ultimately, missile testing is something that is political, symbolic, but also has military value for Iran. So if you are looking to do a full-court press on Iran's bad activities, then you should be concerned about Iran's missile testing and transfers. Iran has tested almost 50 ballistic missiles since the nuclear deal was agreed to in July 2015. This missile in particular is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. It's something that is based off of an original North Korean design, showing a symbiosis between these two nuclear rogue states. And ultimately, this is the way Tehran flexes its muscles, so it's something that is going to have to be pushed back on.
We mentioned the Iran nuclear deal signatories will meet Sunday in Vienna in an attempt to salvage the agreement. How much does this missile test hinder those efforts?
It definitely cuts at the European attempts to save the deal. And it's worth noting that the UN resolution that codifies the nuclear deal has an annex that doesn't have great language when it comes to prohibiting Iranian missile flight testing, but still raises that issue and calls upon Iran not to flight test such missiles. So ultimately, the Iranians would be cutting across this UN annex. They'd be violating it both in letter and in spirit, in my view, and it would make the European case to save the deal even harder.
One of the reasons President Trump withdrew from the 2015 accord was because missile launches are not forbidden under it. So does this bolster the president's case for abandoning it?
Ultimately, yes. It's worth noting that the Europeans cited Iran's longer-range missiles as a threat from January to May of 2018 when they were working with the Americans to find a way to keep the U.S. in the deal while fixing the fatal flaws. Not having Iran's most likely delivery vehicle for a nuclear weapon, which would be a ballistic missile, something that the U.S. intelligence community has previously said and judged, is a fatal flaw of the deal. Now, the goal is how do you use sanctions pressure to curb Iran's missile testing and to bring missiles into some bigger, broader, better deal, which the White House is seeking.
Can the Iran deal really survive without the U.S., do you think?
In some ways, the Iran deal is already dead because the Iranians are now overtly violating clauses that impose restrictions on its nuclear program when it comes to stockpiles they can have in their own country, when it comes to the purity of enrichment that is permitted on their own soil. And the Iran deal was never designed to exist without its major component parts, such as the American sanctions relief and the Iranian nuclear limitations. And the American sanctions relief is gone, and now the Iranian nuclear limitations are unraveling. So in many ways, the JCPOA is dead.
Looking ahead to the meeting Sunday, the remaining signatories under the deal, what might they focus on salvaging in light of the missile test and several tanker attacks in the Strait of Hormuz?
Ultimately, when you look at some of the other players here, particularly the French and the Germans, they're looking to de-escalate tensions in the Gulf, try to create some sort of pause in American sanctions pressure, which is growing apace, and get Iran not to further violate the deal, and then find some way to address America's concerns for leaving the deal to begin with. The Europeans don't want to face this choice where they would have to collapse the UN resolution that codifies the deal, which had that watered-down language on missile testing. The Europeans don't want to do this. I think the Americans ultimately want Europe to go there, and we're going to have to see exactly how the Iranians and some of their friends on the Council, the Russians and Chinese, thread this needle.
A tricky topic. Behnam, thank you for your time and for breaking it down.
My pleasure.
Thank you.